Andrew Joseph Keith here to talk about the ear. So listen up. Lend me your ears. Like many of the other facial features, the ears are complicated. But if you're aware of certain forms and features to look for, it can make sculpting the ear much easier. First, let's simplify the ear. When I sculpted the ear on this simplified planar head, I represented the ear as if it was a slice of orange or a slice of apple. This ear shape tapers towards the front of the face. When we look at it from above, the front plane of the ear is raised on the back of the ear and then tapers towards the front. The ear is like a catcher's mitt for sound.
Huh? What'd you say?
Now let's look at the placement of the ears on the head. The ear canal is just behind where the jaw inserts into its socket. The ear itself is tilted back a little bit. So if we continue that angle of the back of the jaw up, if we continue that line up, then that's usually about what the angle of the ear is at. So the ear is usually slightly tilted back when compared to the front plane of the face. If we look at the ear from above, it comes off the head at about this angle. That being said, some ears lay more flat against the side of the head, and sometimes they're more angled forward, making them more prominent and noticeable when looking at the portrait from the front view. Now that we've got a basic understanding of this simplified shape of the ear, let's go ahead and look at the anatomy of the ear. And then we'll simplify the anatomy into some easier to identify forms. If we look at the back of the ear, we see the concha. In Spanish, that's shell. Concha. Also these little bread pastry things. Attached to the concha is the helix, which is the outermost layer of cartilage that wraps around the ear and starts in the inside middle of the ear, called the crux of the helix, and then spirals outward around the ear. So it starts in the middle, spirals outward. It spirals out and down towards the earlobe. The anatomical term for the earlobe is the lobule of the auricle. Lobule. Look at those lobules on your face. I love your lobules. They're lovely. Sometimes you can see a little bump on the outside edge of the helix around this area called the auricular tubercle. Continuing our journey to the inside of the ear, we have the antihelix. So we have the helix and the antihelix. This antihelix splits at the crura of the antihelix. In between this area where the antihelix splits is called the triangular fossa, just like a little indent that's triangular. Close to the ear canal, we have the tragus or the tragus. This protrudes outward where the cheek transitions to the ear. Across from the tragus, we have the antitragus. And in between them is the intertragic notch. This is also commonly referred to as the ear notch. This is a common area that sculptors like to use when measuring the points of the head. So they'll measure from the ear notch to the center of the chin, to the middle of the nose, the tip of the nose, to the forehead, to the hairline, and then they'll measure the distance between those and get a basic understanding of the measurements of the face. Okay, that was intense, a lot of anatomical terms, but you don't have to remember the names of all these complex anatomical forms to recognize the forms themselves, but if you do learn the names, you're not likely to forget these features when you're sculpting the ear. All you have to remember when it comes to the ear is question mark, why you? Let me show you what I mean. With this question mark and why and you have all of those basic forms of the anatomy of the ear, and it's way easier to remember. The helix that wraps around the ear can be represented as a question mark shape. That gets us pretty close to the general rhythm and shape of this form. But remember that it spirals from the inside inner part of the ear and then comes out as it spirals around the ear. So it's spiraling forward in space when you're looking at the side of the head. I like to make that question mark curve in a little bit more to show that crux of the helix. And then that dot of the question mark is the earlobe. When sculpting, really pay attention to this shape when you look at the model from the front view and then also from the side view and from behind. For example, my ears are a little bit more pointed, like elf ears, like they were squished or something. But most people's are more rounded. When it comes to the earlobe, pay attention to whether it's a hanging earlobe or whether that earlobe is smooth as it transitions to the side of the face. So this is called an attached earlobe, where it just kind of attaches right to the side of the head. But if it's a free earlobe or a hanging earlobe, that's when it hangs down more as it transitions from the side of the face. That lowercase y shape makes up the antihelix. This starts at the antitragus and then curves around the inside edge of that big question mark and then tucks into the form, splitting into those two heads of the Y at the crura of the antihelix. Again, between that tragus and the antitragus is that U shape or that V shape, and pay attention to the angle of this U compared to the angle of the ear. Usually it's tilted. When representing the ear, pay attention to how the forms flow into one another. For example, in some areas, the helix and the antihelix will have a sharp transition, like a sharp corner or a sharp edge. And in other areas, that transition is soft, very soft, and then in some areas, it's kind of swooping. The subtlety of how these forms fit into each other, how they come together, that's what makes the difference between a masterful sculpture and one that looks amateur. All right, your assignment is to sculpt the ear. A life-size ear study. You can take references of your own ear or references of somebody else's. When taking references, be sure to get a bunch of angles. You want to be able to see the ear from the side view, from the front, from behind, from above, so that you can see how these forms change depending on the angle from which you're viewing them. In the premium course, there are many demos where I show you step by step my process for sculpting these facial features. Stay creative, stay productive, do the assignment, sculpt an ear, and I'll see you in the next lesson.